The ranch was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown up. 17 years. That's how long it had been since I'd driven down that winding dirt road, past the rusted mailbox still painted with Dawson Co, through the crooked gate that always leaned right in the wind. My tires kicked up more than just dust. They stirred ghosts. The fields were bare this time of year, late October. The grasses had gone gray, as if mourning the man who'd once walked them with a sketchpad in one hand and a lasso in the other. That was Dad, Frank Dawson, Wyoming's last great cowboy sculptor, local legend, national nobody, my father. I parked next to Dan's new Silverado, which gleamed like a trophy in the autumn sun. Dealership sticker still on the window, $87,000, no doubt paid in full from the ranch's operating account. A quiet thought buzzed at the back of my mind. Does the ranch even make enough anymore to justify that kind of truck? Mine was a 2008 Toyota Tacoma, dented on the driver's side, smelling faintly of mineral spirits and pine. In the back, under a worn tarp, was a treasure no one knew about. Not yet. The house loomed ahead, all cracked paint and proud bones. The old barn stood to the side, where Dad once stored both hay and heartbreak. It was where the will reading would happen, of course. It had been Monica's idea, I was sure. She always had a flair for theatrics. I didn't knock, just walked right in. Monica looked up from a tray of hors d'oeuvres that didn't belong anywhere near this ranch. Fig jam and manchego cheese, arranged like a Pinterest board. Her hug was quick, her smile hollow. "Camille," she said, like the name was an unfamiliar fruit. "Glad you made it." Dan gave me one of his trademark chin lifts from the corner, nursing a glass of something that wasn't ranch hand beer, probably Dad's private whiskey. Macallan 25. I recognized the label. Nearly $2,000 a bottle. I wondered how many they'd gone through since the funeral. "Long drive?" he asked. "4 states," I said, hanging my coat. Had to stop twice to untie things in the back. Wind kept catching the tarp. They didn't ask what was under it. Of course not. Inside the barn, they'd done it up like some faux rustic event venue. Strings of Edison bulbs, vintage rugs over concrete, wildflower centerpieces like this was a wedding and not a wake. Ellen was already seated, papers spread before her, lips pressed in a tight line. I nodded to her. She nodded back. Ellen Rusk, our father's longtime attorney. Quiet, loyal, ethical as far as I could tell. She'd handled the ranch's legal affairs for 20 years. She used to sneak me lemon drops when I tagged along as a girl. Her presence gave me comfort, even now. "Let's begin," she said. There was a silence that settled like dust. Ellen read from the official will, the one Monica and Dan had submitted. It was standard fare, legal language peppered with the occasional frank-ism. The barn, the house, the cattle, the 2 parcels of land totaling 2,300 acres, all appraised at $6.4 million, passed directly to Monica and Dan. 50-50. The mineral rights, the antique bronze casting equipment, even Dad's sketchbooks were divvied up. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. I kept my face still, my fingers resting on the envelope inside my coat. Dan leaned back smugly, legs crossed, boots polished. "Dad always said Camille chose her own path," he said to no one in particular. "Art schools, city life. We were the ones here during the hard years. Makes sense." Monica poured another round of Dad's whiskey, raised her glass. "To Frank," she said, "to the ranch, and to moving forward." They all drank. I stayed quiet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I pulled the envelope from my coat, thick with its promise, and placed it gently on the table. My hand didn't tremble. Not anymore. Ellen's eyes met mine. Is that what I think it is? She asked. It's what he gave me, I said. After the reading, there were whispers. Ellen didn't open the envelope. Not yet. She knew better. She simply placed it in her leather briefcase, locked the clasp, and excused herself from the table. Dan called after her, voice sharp. If this is some kind of stunt, Camille. It's not, I said. You'll want to wait before pouring another drink. Monica's voice was rising, shrill. Are you seriously doing this now? He left us everything. You made your choice. You left. I looked her squarely in the face. Number, I was pushed. Every time I brought home a sculpture, you rolled your eyes. Every time Dad praised my work, you told him it was a phase. I stopped coming around because it hurt too much to pretend we were a family. She blinked, stunned. Dan rolled his eyes but said nothing. I turned and walked out into the fading light, the barn door creaking behind me like an old sigh. The wind had picked up. It whistled through the dry fence posts, pulling the scent of dust and hay. I stood by my truck, hand resting on the tailgate. Inside the trailer, beneath layers of cloth and burlap, rested 17 of my father's final sculptures. He made them in secret. He mailed them to me over the course of 8 years, unsigned, unbragged, but I knew his hands, his calloused, bleeding, blessed hands. I knew every chisel mark like a daughter knows a father's laugh. He had told me once, in a letter I kept taped above my studio sink, this place was never about cattle, Cammy. It was always about form, shape, soul. And now, he was going to say it to all of them, in his own words, in a way they couldn't erase. But that moment would come. Not today. That night, I slept in the hayloft. I could have stayed at a motel, but I needed to be near the wood and the memory, near the place where he taught me how to weld a joint without fear. I curled into my old army sleeping bag and watched stars through the cracks in the roof. They thought they'd won. They thought silence meant surrender. But I knew what I carried. A notarized will, a signed video, his voice, his legacy, his truth, all sealed in one quiet envelope. Let them toast. Tomorrow, the reckoning begins. The next morning was brittle with cold. Frost coated the railings as I climbed down from the hayloft, my breath puffing white into the barn's still air. Somewhere inside the house, Monica's curated playlist of old country classics was already playing through speakers. Dan probably had his boots up on Dad's old coffee table, sipping black coffee from a monogrammed mug. The estate might have been built on blood and sweat, but they were wasting no time turning it into a lifestyle brand. At 10 a.m. sharp, Ellen called us back to the barn. No flowers this time, no whiskey. Just a table, 4 folding chairs, and a single envelope, mine, resting in the center like a dormant volcano. I didn't sit. I stood behind Ellen, watching her unbuckle her briefcase, smooth the flap open, and remove the envelope like it was a surgical instrument. Her fingers were steady, her face unreadable. "Camille," she said, soft but clear, "is it your intent to submit this as a legal contestation to the will?" I nodded once. Dan let out a bark of laughter. "Seriously? That envelope's gonna overturn a $6 million estate? That's not how this works." Monica leaned forward, lipsticked and coiled. "It's a stunt. Some guilt trip performance. She always needed to be the center of everything." I ignored them. My eyes stayed on Ellen. She sliced the envelope open with the small silver letter opener Dad used to keep on his desk. Inside, a notarized document dated 7 months before the one Dan and Monica had submitted, and a USB drive. Ellen looked at me. "You want me to play it?" "Play it," I said. The barn lights dimmed as Ellen clicked the video open on her laptop, casting the image onto a portable screen she'd set up for the reading. There he was, my father, alive. He sat on the porch of my studio in Santa Fe, his back to the desert, a blanket across his lap. His eyes looked tired, but his voice was steady. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone," he began. "And if Camille brought this forward, it's because I asked her to, and she's the only one I trust to do it." Dan shifted in his seat. Monica sat rigid, mouth tight, arms folded. Dad continued. "I made a mistake the first time around. I let noise drown out truth. The ranch isn't a business anymore. Not really. It's a piece of me. And Camille? She saw that. She saw me. Not the rancher, not the brand, the artist, the man underneath the dust." A pause, a long one, the kind he used to take before saying something that stuck. "I want her to have it all. The land, the buildings, the sculptures, even the debt. And there's some of that too. Roughly $340,000 owed across taxes, equipment loans, and back wages. It's not a gift. It's a responsibility. And she's the only one who ever understood that." The screen faded to black. Silence. Then Monica's voice exploded like a flare gun. "He was manipulated. You manipulated him." She turned to Ellen. "This isn't legal. She probably filmed it herself. Dad didn't even know how to work a phone camera." Ellen didn't flinch. "The will is dated, signed, notarized, and video confirmed. That timestamp matches the day Frank and I spoke about updating his estate. We filed preliminary paperwork, but he asked me to delay submission until after he finalized his plans with Camille." Dan stood abruptly, chair screeching against concrete. "I want to see that signature," he snapped, "and I want it compared." Ellen handed him the document. He stared at it, nostrils flaring, before tossing it onto the table like it stung. "I don't buy it," he said. "Dad never would have cut us out." I smiled for the first time. "You mean he never would have finally seen through you?" Dan stepped toward me. "You left. You turned your back on this place. On us." "I left because you wouldn't stop stealing from him." The words hit like cold water. Monica went still. Dan blinked. "What are you talking about?" he said. I didn't look away. "You skimmed from the ranch budget for years. Overbilled vendors, falsified expenses. I found the spreadsheets on Dad's old laptop. You listed fencing materials from a supplier that went out of business in 2014. I checked his jaw clenched. Monica turned to him, voice cracking. "Is that true?" He glared at me. "She's lying." "No, I'm not. You want to talk loyalty? You bled this place dry while Dad was dying. And you," I turned to Monica, "you were planning to turn the barn into an event space. You had mock-ups done, custom chandeliers. Dad hated chandeliers." "I was preserving the property," she shrieked. "You were preserving your image," I snapped. The barn pulsed with tension. The video still sat on loop in the background, Dad's face frozen in his final words. Ellen cleared her throat. "The will is valid. Frank Dawson's estate, including assets, liabilities, and intellectual property, now passes entirely to Camille Dawson." She looked at me. "You'll need to sign acceptance papers and start the transfer process. I can guide you through that. But the ranch is yours." Dan turned to Monica. "We fight this." Monica nodded like a bobblehead. "We take it to court. We challenge the signature. We claim mental incompetence." "Do that," I said softly. "But every dollar you spend comes out of your pockets, not the ranch's, and I'll subpoena every invoice Dan ever filed." Dan stared at me, his face like stone. "You're going to regret this," he said. "No," I replied. You're going to regret underestimating me." That night, I unlocked my trailer and uncovered the sculptures. I placed one, the smallest, in the center of the barn floor. It was of a woman curled around a tree stump, hands calloused, face weathered but calm. He had titled it Endurance. I stood next to her, and for the first time in 17 years, I didn't feel like a visitor. I was home. And now the reckoning wasn't just coming. It had already begun. The next morning, the sky hung low and colorless. One of those flat Wyoming days when the wind doesn't even bother. I woke before sunrise in my trailer, the air smelling of cold dust and cedar. For a long time, I just sat there at the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the sheet-covered forms stacked in the corner. 17 sculptures. My father's secret collection. His last truth, hidden from the very family that claimed to love him most. I uncovered the largest piece first, a human figure fused into the curve of a gnarled steer's skull. It had taken him 2 months to finish. I'd been there for every stroke of the chisel, every cigarette he smoked in silence, every time he stopped and whispered, "Not yet. She's not done speaking." I remembered the night he loaded them into my trailer one by one, his hands trembling but proud. "They'll never understand this," he'd said, "but you will. Keep them safe for me." Now was the time to show the world. By mid-morning, Ellen had returned with 2 members of her legal team, both clad in pressed suits and grave expressions. She didn't speak much, but the way she looked at me told me everything. She believed me, and more than that, she believed in him. I rolled open the trailer door and watched as they stared at the pieces, their eyes wide, the silence reverent. One of them, a younger man named Ross, whispered, "These are museum quality, easily 7 figures collectively." I nodded. He called them his confessions. They helped me move the sculptures, one by one, into the barn, placing them on hay bales and old crates like temporary pedestals. It was a makeshift gallery of bone and metal and grief. Each piece breathed with his energy. The wind whistled softly through the gaps in the barn siding, as if even nature itself paused to watch. By the time Monica and Dan arrived, the barn had transformed. They stepped inside, their designer boots clicking against the floor. Monica's face twisted in confusion, then suspicion. Dan just scowled. "What is this?" Monica asked, voice sharp. I stepped forward. His real will, not just on paper, in bronze, in steel, in the things he left behind when no one was looking. Dan walked up to one sculpture, a twisted form of a woman shielding a child, the title plate etched crudely into the base. What they didn't see. He snorted. "Looks like scrap metal." "You would say that," I said. "You never stayed long enough to understand any of it." Monica turned to Ellen. "Are these even his? Anyone could have made these?" Ellen didn't blink. "Each piece is signed. Photographic timestamps exist. His fingerprints are on the casting molds, and your father authorized their transport to Camille's studio himself. I have the shipping invoices." Signed Dan stepped closer to me, eyes narrowed. "What do you want from us, Camille? An apology? A parade? You got the land? You got the junk art? What else do you need?" I stared at him, cold and clear. "I want you to see what you never looked at. The man you thought you knew. The father you claimed to love, who begged you to listen, and you never heard him. I did. But that wasn't the worst of it. Not yet." Ellen looked up from her files. "There's something else." She laid out a folder and slid it across the table to me. "Frank kept a personal ledger, one he didn't share with the accountants. I found it in a lockbox in Santa Fe. It's detailed, painfully so. I opened it. There, in his own handwriting, were entries dating back 6 years. Every transaction Dan made on behalf of the ranch, every loan Monica requested until her business picked up, every time he paid off their debts without telling them. Monica's name appeared 19 times. Dan's, 34. Over $780,000 total. Quietly given, never repaid. I turned to them. You bled him dry. Monica went pale. He offered. He said it was nothing, that it was just support. He said that, I replied, because he loved you, even when you didn't deserve it. Dan exploded. You think you're some saint? You left for 20 damn years. You ran away to carve rocks in the desert. I stepped forward, close enough to smell his cologne, cheap and choking. And every week he called me. Every month he came to visit. He paid for my studio when the landlord tried to evict me. He told me you were the reason he stayed, that if he left, the whole place would fall apart. So he stayed, and you took advantage of that. He grabbed one of the ledger pages and crumpled it. That's not proof of anything, he said. We'll say you fabricated it. We'll say he was senile. We'll bury you in litigation. You won't, I said. Why not? Because I've already given copies to the press. Dan froze. Monica gasped. You what? They're embargoed until tomorrow morning. If you fight the will, they get released, with names, dates, and your exact words from your text messages. Dad kept everything. Ellen nodded. The texts were backed up on his cloud account. They are legally admissible and time-stamped. I've reviewed them myself. Monica sank into a chair. Dan stormed out. The next day, I placed one of the smaller sculptures, a horse's ribcage hollowed into a cradle, in the barn loft window. The wind caught its shadow and stretched it across the floor. A journalist from Western Arts and Legacy came by in the afternoon, curious about the collection. He stared at one of the pieces for a long while before saying, Why didn't he ever show these? I looked out over the fields, wide and brown and broken with memory. Because they were never meant for strangers, I said. They were meant for the people who never looked. He nodded, thoughtful. Will you put them on display? Yes, I said. All 17. Then I paused. But not here. Not yet. Where then? I smiled, small and certain. Somewhere they can teach people what not to do with a legacy. Later that night, I carved my father's initials into a cedar plank above the barn door. Not the brand, just his signature, like the ones etched into the sculptures. Frank Dawson, not the rancher, the artist, the father who finally let himself be known. And I, the daughter who had waited her whole life to be seen, was the only one who ever saw him clearly. The day after the journalists arrived, the ranch grew quiet in a way I'd never heard before. Not empty, not dead, just cleared. As if the house itself had exhaled for the first time in years. Dan was gone before sunrise. I watched from the porch as his gleaming black Escalade peeled down the gravel road, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air long after he disappeared. He didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note, just vanished, like he'd never belonged here to begin with, which in the end, he didn't. Later that morning, Monica arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and false composure, dragging her lawyer like a child with a broken kite. She strutted into the barn, past the sculptures, past Ellen, past me, and slammed a leather portfolio onto the table. This isn't over, she said, voice tight. That will may be real, but the circumstances... She looked at her lawyer, who nodded. The circumstances surrounding its creation are questionable. I'm filing for contestation on grounds of undue influence, emotional manipulation, and I held up a finger. Before you say anything else, I said calmly, you should know that Frank's voice is on video, explicitly confirming his intentions, not just in the will, but in hours of footage, including one of you, arguing with him about the very thing you're denying now. Her mouth twitched. I'll drag this through every court in Wyoming. No, Monica, Ellen said, stepping forward. You'll try. But the thing about lawsuits is, they cost money. And based on the bank documents we subpoenaed yesterday, you have very little left. Your boutique went into receivership 6 weeks ago. You leveraged your condo twice. Your cards are maxed. I'll find the money, she snapped. You already did, I said, from Dad, over and over, and he gave it, hoping one day you'd grow into someone who could carry his legacy. Instead, you tried to rewrite it. She looked at me for a long time. Her lips parted, not to speak but to search, for sympathy, for weakness. She found neither. She left an hour later, high heels crunching across the gravel, dignity evaporating with every step. That night, I sat under the stars with Ellen and Ross, a thermos of whiskey between us. This place is something, Ross said, looking around the property, the silhouette of the barn against the dusk sky. Feels like a story waiting to be told. It already was, I said, but no one was listening. Ellen lit a cigarette. The first time I'd seen her do anything remotely undignified. What now, Camille? I looked down at my hands, scarred from tools, from years of working metal and clay, from the hard-won peace of isolation. Now, I said, we build. The announcement came 2 weeks later. In front of the barn, surrounded by press, locals, artists, ranchers, and kids on field trips with wide eyes and dirt-streaked sneakers, I stood behind a cedar podium with my father's initials carved into the front. The Frank Dawson Foundation, I began, voice steady, will be housed on this land not just to preserve what my father created, but to expand it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This isn't just an art museum. It's a working ranch. It's a school. It's a place where sculptors from across the world will come and live for seasons at a time, learning to carve with bone and wood, to shape metal with fire. And in return, every artist will teach. Locals, kids, veterans, anyone who needs to feel the weight of a chisel in their hand and learn that they too can leave a mark. I paused. This land taught me that creation can grow in the ruins of grief, that something broken can become something whole, and I want to give that to others. Applause rose around me, not polite, not performative, real. That evening, I walked the perimeter of the property alone, the air sharp with that high-altitude scent of juniper and hay. I passed the workshop, now converted into a gallery classroom, and the horse barn that would soon become a communal dining hall. The old bunkhouse would be remodeled for visiting fellows. Solar panels were already being installed on the southern ridge. I'd pulled $1.2 million from my own savings to get it started. Another $400,000 came in from private donors once word got out. I refused government grants, not out of pride, but because I wanted this place to stay lean, honest, accountable to no one but the people it served. It wasn't a trust fund museum for the bored and wealthy. It was a forge. The fallout from the press pieces on Dan was swift and brutal. The Casper Chronicle ran a full spread. Rancher's son took $300,000 in phantom caretaker payments during father's decline. The emails were damning. Bills submitted for equipment that never arrived, repairs never made, stock that vanished off the books. Dan issued a short statement through a lawyer in Cheyenne, then promptly disappeared. Word around town was that he'd relocated to Arizona, trying to start fresh with a new name and a handful of connections that didn't care who he used to be. Monica, meanwhile, continued her legal tantrum for a month before the court denied her petition due to insufficient evidence and financial incapacity to proceed. She tried to start a podcast called The Real Dawson Legacy, but 3 episodes in, she broke down crying and accused a caller of being a plant sent by Camille. She hasn't spoken to me since. That's fine. I'm not interested in reunion. What surprised me most, though, was how many people came. Former ranch hands, old friends of my father I barely remembered, students I'd once taught in New Mexico, a woman from Texas who said my father's work saved her during a dark winter, a boy from the reservation who watched me weld for 10 minutes and then asked, "Can I try?" Of course, I said yes. And when he struck the steel with the torch and the sparks flew up like fireflies, he whispered, "It's like the metal's talking back." Exactly, I thought. Exactly that. On the first official day of the residency program, I stood at the edge of the main corral, watching 6 artists unload their tools from a van. One of them, a retired school teacher from Oregon, turned to me and said, "I don't think I've ever felt so welcome anywhere." I smiled. "That's the land talking," I said. "It's been waiting for you." That night, I carved the words "land as canvas" into the foundation wall of the new sculpture studio. Because this ranch wasn't just my inheritance, it was his unfinished piece, and now mine to complete. The sun rose over the ridge in a blaze of copper and rose gold. A Wyoming morning, crisp, proud, and stubbornly alive. Opening day. We'd hung canvas banners across the gateposts that read, "The Frank Dawson Foundation, where land becomes legacy." It still made my throat catch when I saw his name, not in mourning, but in full defiant celebration. By 10 a.m., the place was buzzing. Families arrived in old pickup trucks and hybrid minivans. Retired ranchers in bolo ties shook hands with city art dealers in linen shirts. Kids skipped through the gravel paths between sculptures, stopping to point at the bronze horse head rising from a bed of sagebrush, or the twisted iron figure that looked like it might walk off the pedestal if you blinked too long. 17 pieces, my father's secret collection, each standing tall beneath the open sky. He'd made them in silence, in solitude, and now they were finally seen. And beside them, new works had begun to appear, pieces by our inaugural artists, some already installed, others still half-shaped under white tents. Welders sparked. Brushes swept across sheet metal. The air smelled of varnish and prairie wind. I stood off to the side, hands wrapped around a thermos of strong coffee, watching it all unfold. People came up to me, one after another. A Navajo artist named Claire touched one of my father's sculptures and whispered, "This feels like prayer." A grandfather from Cody leaned down and told his granddaughter, "He built these with his hands, just like your mom builds you Halloween costumes." A veteran in a faded army cap shook my hand with tears in his eyes. It's the first place I've been in years where I didn't feel in the way. Every word felt like a chisel strike, etching something permanent into my chest. At noon, I began carving. We'd set up a space near the barn, a shaded platform surrounded by folding chairs and hay bales, where I would start a piece live. Demonstration, yes, but also ceremony. The title was already decided. Inheritance isn't always blood. I chose a slab of mahogany that had been drying in my father's workshop for over 20 years, dense, dark, and veined with gold like old rivers, just like him. With every strike of my chisel, I felt something crack and settle inside me. Not a wound, a release. I carved a circle first, then a cradle inside it, then open hands, reaching but not clutching. The crowd was quiet. Children leaned into their parents. Wind stirred the dust, but no one moved. After an hour, I stepped back. It wasn't finished, wouldn't be for days, but the shape was there. The idea was alive. Someone from the press came up to me after, a woman with gray curls and soft eyes. She held out her mic and asked gently, "Have you made peace with your family?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it clearly. Peace, I said, isn't always reunion. Sometimes it's reclamation. She smiled like she understood, and I think she did. That evening, as the crowd thinned and the sculptures glowed in the fading light, I walked through the property one last time, my boots stirring dust where cattle used to roam, where lies used to root, where now something else had taken hold. Not vengeance, not justice, but something deeper. Article forgiveness, freedom. I stood in front of the last sculpture my father ever made, an iron figure with a broken crown, kneeling but not defeated, and I touched its arm. "Thank you," I whispered. "I saw you, and I hope you see me now." The wind blew softly through the juniper. I swear it nodded. If this story moved you, if Camille's journey resonated with you, if you've ever been the black sheep who turned out to be the backbone, then I invite you, like this video, leave a comment, share your thoughts, your story, or your favorite moment. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, mature, and meaningful stories like this one. Because sometimes the story doesn't end with revenge. Sometimes it begins again with reclamation.